You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole. I am just one of your hosts, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited to have back with me Christy Morris as we are going on another tomb raiding adventure.
Somebody's poisoned the water hole.
There's a snake in my boot.
But like literally black acid in the water hole.
I know. Apparently Pandora cries acid tears. And so just don't drink the water. You're not going to want to drink it. But we're back. We're going to be talking about the second Lara Croft Tomb Raider film with Angelina Jolie, The Cradle of Life. Before we dive into everything, thank you so much for listening. It always means a lot to us, the fact that you tune in. Of course, subscribe wherever you are listening to this, and you'll get all the episodes as soon as they drop. In fact, as this episode's coming out, we're going to actually have a couple of Assembling Avengers episodes coming out pretty much back to back, so you'll want to check those out as well. You'll find that in the feed. And of course, you could find us all over social media. We're on what used to be Twitter called X, I don't even know what that is, but whatever. You could find us there at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram as well at the 602 Club TFM. We would love to interact with you and have you follow us there. You can find us online at trek.fm or on Facebook at facebook.com/trekfm with the entire network. We've got a listeners discussion group you can join on Facebook called the Babel Conference. So just go over there and join that by typing Babel into the search field. You'll find us. And you can go to Patreon at patreon.com/trekfm and become part of the team. Support us and make sure that all of the podcasts that we do can keep coming to you each and every week. So, Christy, this is, even before we get into the opening of the film and everything, I thought it'd be interesting to maybe talk about Angelina Jolie and her diving into this role for a second time. And I wondered for you how you felt about how she did in the movie, and if she felt more comfortable, or you felt like her performance had changed at all, gotten better or worse. How did you feel like she did in this second film?
I think any issues that I had with this film were not to do with her performance. I think that definitely by now she is comfortable in the role. I think that she does some really great work with her movements and her fighting. I particularly love the way that she unexpectedly flips over somebody in a fight. I think that she just is really getting good at the action. And then still finds a way to bring some depth to some scenes that you may not necessarily expect, like the death scene in the end. So, yeah, I mean, I was still really impressed with her, and this was only 2 years later, so I still see it being pretty comfortable for her. But what did you think?
Yeah, I think that not only is she very comfortable in the role, I think that she feels even more comfortable. I think she's really kind of settled into the character here. I think in some ways it feels like she's having even more fun on the movie as well. There's just a few scenes there where she, kind of winks at somebody or just kind of gives them a big smile or just there's a lot of joy that I feel like she's having in the movie. Like when they land in China for the first time, her friend tells her, that she's got all her stuff ready and she's, tuned up her bike a little bit and everything. She kind of like just runs off screen towards, her gear and everything. And so I feel like there's a lot of joy that she ends up having in the movie, and just through the portrayal and everything. And so, yeah, I think she kind of nails the character. And I think, as we'll talk about maybe later, it's too bad that we didn't get more movies with her as this character, because I think she had just kind of really settled in And that's too bad. But the movie does, really start off with this big opening, a lot like a Bond movie would. And yet, unlike those early Bond movies where you kind of have the beginning openings action sequence where it doesn't tie into the rest of the movie, this ties in to the entire film as there's an earthquake near the Santorini island there in Greece, and it uncovers this lost Luna temple that Alexander the Great had hidden his greatest treasures in, and there is where, Laura finds the orb that kind of sets off this entire sequence of events that's going to come. And how did you end up liking this really big opening? I mean, I feel like they're going for broke here at the beginning of the film, and, it kind of culminates with Laura punching a shark.
Well, before we get to the shark, I'll say it's funny, this opening is so memorable for me, even as it was first just panning up from the water toward the wedding reception. I was going, oh yeah, it was a wedding in Greece, before we even got close enough to know that that's what it was. So clearly I've seen this movie a few times. But it is very reminiscent of a Bond film and of throwing you straight into the action. And then they also find a way to make the title sequence later an interesting part of, having like the rubble pieces come together to form the words. Although it doesn't look great effect wise, it's a video game movie technically. So you kind of, I think, give it a pass in my world. But I think that it's a good open, and I like that although the story, for sure, you could guess probably stretches the truth to make a good story, there are elements of actual history that are part of this story that they weave together. There was actually a temple of Luna, which was the goddess of the moon, but it didn't seem to have anything to do actually with Alexander the Great. And it was completely destroyed a long, long, long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of starting like this, having her come into on the Wave Runners is really fun. It gives them an opportunity to do some fun stunts and kind of set, again, I think, the tempo for the film where, she just seems as a character to be having a really fun time. And the idea, too, of finding a temple like this is very Tomb Raider-like. I think the whole sequence feels very much out of the games where she's exploring an underwater temple, and the idea of, there being this orb there that she doesn't quite know what it is yet, but is going to be important. And then, of course, her being attacked by other treasure hunters who play into the rest of the movie, and, they're working for the villain. We don't know that yet, but, I think all of this does a great job of kind of setting the stakes for the film, especially since, too, I think, you have the brutal murders of the two Greek guys that are with her, that are working on her boat, and helping her, gather the treasure. And so it lets things are really serious, really fast. And, I mean, the movie doesn't jump the shark, but it does punch the shark. And it's a little bit silly, of course. But it does also feel like something you might get in a Tomb Raider game. And then, to have her rescued by the British submarine it feels very over the top. But again, it has that James Bond feel to it, which, I think I really like this opening sequence. I think it feels also pretty refined action wise, and the production looks great here too at the beginning, which is really important. Like, everything about this is kind of, I think, doing a great job of pulling you in to the film and creating a nice setup for the rest of what we're going to be doing and what we're going to be kind of after in this story.
Well, I think that there are a lot of good parts of it. The shark piece does bother me a lot. And it's funny, I initially thought when she sliced her arm that it was going to be a scuba diving reference to trying to prevent the bends. That somehow if you open up a vein, the nitrogen can escape. I don't know. And that she was just going to swim to the top. I forgot about the shark. And now I know why. Because the shark looked bad. And punching a shark and riding it is highly improbable. But the rest of it was awesome. And I mean, like you said, especially when she then gets picked up by the British submarine, just rising up from underneath her and then them rescuing her is cool. I mean, that feels very Bond as well. And, you know, like I said, the history behind everything, not giving too much information, but feeling plausible enough, I think is such a good addition to that. Because it's not going super into detail to the point where it can't back out of that later.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, one of the cool things about that is, as well, you know, using the earthquake to uncover something like this. You know, I thought, like you said, I feel like that feels very plausible. You know, that type of stuff happens a lot in archaeology. And so, or at least it does happen in archaeology. So I think I like where that's all going. I wanted to ask you, it turns out that the map leads to Pandora's box. And with any of these type of films, you know, what you're after kind of sets the stage, you know, especially with something like an Indiana Jones movie. And so how did you feel that Pandora's box works then as the kind of MacGuffin that they're chasing throughout this entire movie?
That I loved, because I think that you need something that's going to have this mysticism around it, that's going to be unfamiliar enough to an audience to where you've hooked them now to figure out what's going to happen and if they're going to find it and what it's going to do. And that it's a realistic thing to be an issue in a modern society where biological warfare is a risk. You know, it's the thought process has kind of been that wasn't something that was as possible in the past because people, you know, maybe didn't have the knowledge to make that happen or whatever. And now it's more and more likely that someone could get a hold of the wrong virus and set it free and then, you know, kill half the world or more. I mean, heck, look what COVID did to all of us. So I think that definitely starting in the 2000s when we were more and more concerned about that as a real risk, this is a great storytelling piece to have something interesting to go after.
I think it's really interesting to have this as a MacGuffin, the thing that we're going to be chasing. I think, like you said, it's familiar enough in the zeitgeist of humanity to kind of have an understanding of what this thing is. But I think also it allows you, because, you know, nobody knows really what's inside it, they're able to use this to their benefit. And I think that's the thing that I really enjoyed about how they do use it. And I think it really works. And, you know, it's one of those things where I keep thinking to myself as I was watching this one, I really wish there was more to this franchise with Angelina Jolie, because I felt like there were plenty of other things they could have picked up on and used, and it would have been great. And so Pandora's box, I think, was a perfect way for them to go. Now, one of the things that I did want to ask you about with this second movie is that there seems to be this feel, we already talked about the James Bond feel, but that we get Secret Agent Tomb Raider, because MI6, you know, recruits Laura to find the orb before Dr. Jonathan Reese, and, you know, before he can create weapons of mass destruction virally. And this movie ends up, I think, in many ways feeling like kind of part Tomb Raider movie and then part like spy thriller movie. And I wanted to ask you how you felt like that worked here in this second film.
That was something that seemed a little bumpy to me, because they kind of call it out themselves in the script when Lara says, well, if I have Her Majesty's permission. Like, she was going to be doing this anyway. She really doesn't care that MI6 wants her to do it. And, she kind of makes it clear that if they send agents to help her, they're just going to be in the way and that she works alone. Or that on the very least, if she doesn't work alone, she's going to pick her team, in which case she picks Terry Sheridan. So I think that kind of starts it off in the direction of like, Lara's going to do whatever she wants to do, and she's not anybody's spy on staff. And then also that she doesn't follow orders well, so she wouldn't be someone who would be capable of actually being part of MI6 or a similar organization, because she would constantly go rogue. So then trying to make it almost like she is a spy doesn't really work. And it feels too much sometimes like trying to make Indiana Jones and Bond fit together as one piece, and it just doesn't quite fit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm thinking specifically of the scene where they're suddenly in the Cradle of Life and have the Shadow Guardians and the people being picked off, and it's like you're watching an entirely different movie. Like, I thought of Predator.
Yeah, I think that, I do think that this is an interesting place where, because that part doesn't bother me because, it kind of goes with almost like that Indiana Jones vibe, right? Where you're messing with mystical powers and all that kind of stuff.
But it's not the spy vibe.
Part, right. But it's not the spy vibe, which is a big part of this film. Like, the middle of this movie very much feels like a spy film. And, where you're going to these locations, and a lot of them are based off of mission work instead of, tomb raiding work. And, I know from the video games too that there are places where that's a part of the games. But I almost feel like, the movie, it seems to be of two minds. I don't know if it congeals the way that they want it to, really.
Right.
I don't know if they found the balance between those yet, because that is an important part of the tomb raiding games in many ways, right? Is there are parts of the games that can feel a little bit like a mixture between a James Bond movie and an Indiana Jones movie. And I don't know if they quite get that here. And to me, it is one of the things that actually kind of, I think in some ways makes me enjoy the balance they got in the first movie better than this one. Mm-hmm. It's not terrible or anything, but I think there are just too many points in this film where we're in a major cityscape and those kind of things where it kind of misses the feel that I want, I guess, from a Tomb Raider movie where I want to be kind of raiding tombs, and in those type of settings more so than I want to be in downtown Hong Kong.
Right. Well, I mean, if you go right back to like every Indiana Jones movie, usually he's out in the environments, and that's what continues to give it the feel of it being about historical things and, things that belong in a museum, and feeling very grounded, lived in, jungles and tombs and things like that. And that's what would make Tomb Raider what it is. And here it's almost like they are trying to add elements which are really cool on their own, but don't fit with that world. So it is like there are some scenes that I think you could cut and still have a good continuity without. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's, I guess maybe too, there's probably some ways to just maybe add those sequences in different areas, so we're not spending so much time, I guess, away from, like you said, the field. And, I wish that would had been the case. And one of the things, though, I think the movie does pretty well, and it is very interesting because I think that the villain is even more relevant today than, when this movie came out. The idea of somebody who's willing to weaponize viruses and the absolute danger of this. And, as we've seen, the ways in which, we had an entire pandemic and all that kind of stuff. And so I just, watching Ciarán Hinds play this character who could care less about what he is going to unleash on the world as long as he's going to make money, was great in some ways. I mean, even more terrifying than, what you would have thought then, because of where we have been in, the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I want to start with, too, just having Ciarán as the actor for playing the villain is a huge step in the right direction, because everything I've ever seen him in, he has that immediate weight and seriousness and overpowering nature about him. I feel like it would make me even more uncomfortable to see him laugh at something, because I'm not expecting it out of him. He just always seems so serious. I mean, almost even reminding me of Count Dooku. He owns a room.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so it was so good seeing him in this role, especially because it works with giving you that fear that he is going to do something, has no regard for the consequences. And that I love they do have that turning point with Lara, where she thinks that he is going to be the one to unleash it, and realizes he's just selling it to the highest bidder. He doesn't care. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and just, I think one of the things that with him as a villain, this idea that we can play with these things and that we can control the consequences, right? Like that he thinks that, he can open Pandora's box and be able to use what's ever inside to create something he can actually control.
Right.
I think the hubris of that is just astounding. And yet I think of us seeing in our world people playing with viruses and trying to make them more virulent and, all of those type of things, and having no regard of what could happen if it gets out, or they couldn't find an antidote. I mean, all of these type of things I think is just kind of terrifying. And so, and again, Ciarán Hinds, I think, does a phenomenal job of bringing that to life, right? Mm-hmm. Like, he's freaking scary.
And then, I mean, props to the actor that plays the Ebola victim on the plane. He sold it too. Did that not scare the crap out of you just from that scene?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where all of that, I think, is really working for the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's also a very akin to the idea of, the way you saw Indiana Jones deal with these type of things, where the villain is trying to utilize something that they shouldn't be playing with in the first place, with powers they don't understand for their own gain. And, of course, the hero trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And in that way, I think this plays very much like you would expect with an Indiana Jones film. And so, of course, another part of this movie is that the love interest is different because Daniel Craig did not want to return for this movie. He did another movie instead. And so Gerard Butler comes in as Terry Sheridan, somebody who, again, has a history with Laura, but he's betrayed his country and her previously, making him a pretty, untrustworthy person for her and a liability for her throughout the entire movie. Her having to think whether or not he's truly going to be on her side. And so, yeah, what did you end up thinking of him in this role? And, is it one of those things where you do kind of wish you could have had Daniel Craig just be back and, continue that relationship?
I'm kind of glad Daniel Craig didn't come back, because I feel like Gerard Butler really owned this role. And this was before he had even done 300. This was a little earlier in his career, where he's starting to get more big name films. And I think that he had a lot more interesting things to do with this character than we saw with Daniel Craig in the last film. And that he was more ruthless. He really gives Laura a run for her money in this movie. I like that they have their banter and then, constantly trying to outdo themselves with their bike stunts or fighting. And then the scene on the submarine as well, where she handcuffs him so that he can't get away and then leaves him there. And, I think it all really comes to a head when he thinks that he wants to keep Pandora's box. And she realizes she was right all along not to trust him. And, I think that they both play do a really great job of playing it up that they are sizing each other up throughout the journey, trying to determine if they can trust each other again, if they want to get back together in a romantic relationship. There's obviously still chemistry there, but she has doubts, and now you realize why. By the end, that he is unfortunately one of the selfish people that is going to use something he doesn't understand for his own ends. He says, I helped you keep this from rice. Now this is my reward. So I love that you kind of wonder if he's going to go that way. And then he really takes a turn and then actually almost kills Laura. And she has to take him out first. So yeah, I loved him in this role. I thought it was a really interesting character and the backstory that they give, but not too much. How did you feel about it?
It's really interesting because I do think that having Craig back would have been nice to allow that relationship to go somewhere and deepen. But at the same time, where they take the character of Sheridan, you wouldn't want him in this role, right? Because you wouldn't want his character Alex to die, because you wouldn't want him to make that decision, especially after what happened in the previous film. And so, I think Gerard Butler does a great job in the role, like you said. I think he plays it perfectly. He's very good at this type of role. And I think one of the things that was interesting, and I keep going back to this, Indiana Jones, because the movies are so similar in this way, but he kind of plays the role of the Elsa character in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where at the end, she wants the Grail and she won't let it go, and Indy, can't hold on because she won't let go. And, in some ways, this movie, you kind of have that issue happening with him, except, he's much more defiant about it, and what's interesting too, there was a version of the script where Reese kills him instead of Laura. And I think in the end, I like Laura having to make that decision where she's willing to make sure that nobody opens this box, even though she will be tempted as well to open it, and to leave it where it is and leave it hidden, and nobody will be able to find it again. And so I liked that because there's a lot of, complexity in that, where it's like you love somebody, but their choices are continuing them down a path that you can't save them from, and for her, she even has to make sure that, he's not going to endanger the entire world as well. So, I thought he's great, and I thought it made for a really interesting story. And, in some ways it is too bad that, you couldn't have Alex back. But again, I wouldn't want him to have had that be his story, when I really ended up enjoying his character. And, where they end things with his character there, it's not a place that, it's not a place you would want him to end up. So,
well, and Terry also has one key piece of dialogue there that I'm sure you remember. When he says, "You're not going to choose them over me," it was just like, wow. Talk about hubris. Meaning he doesn't think she's going to choose the whole world's safety over his, or the whole world's lives over his, because she's too in love with him. She just can't let go. And she proves that she can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think it works, and I think maybe if there's anything in some ways, I think the movie could do better, as we talked about the idea of it, working together with the two genres better, and kind of combining them better. I almost feel like it would have been nice maybe to have a little bit more time with them together, and just even so you could add just a little bit more depth. And I mean, maybe 1 to 2 minutes. I'm not asking for a lot. I just think just a little bit more there would have been great. I think even conversation that they have about their relationship and, what kind of happened in it all. I would have, I guess, in some ways, it's just a little bit too ambiguous too. I just would have liked it to be a little bit more. But all in all, I think they did, a pretty good job. And so, obviously, one of the things that make these movies interesting are the locations that we go to. And so we go to Hong Kong, we go to China, even though they don't actually film in China, and Africa as well, of course. And so did you feel like they gave us, and of course Greece, and so did you feel like we got enough locations to kind of really build out an enjoyable Tomb Raider movie? So we kind of, in many ways, Tomb Raider is a lot like James Bond in that too, where you're going to these exotic locations, and that's a big part of the films. And so did it work for you where we ended up going?
Overall, yes. But, even though the scene with them wearing the flying squirrel suits was cool for cinematography and special, stunts, that I think that the city scenes kind of took me out of the rest of the movie. But I love how much they film on location otherwise. The caves with the terracotta soldiers, the underground temple looking so realistic. Or sorry, not underground, underwater. And then, also in Africa, I think that it gives so much to a movie when, like we talked about with the last movie, you don't have to build as many sets and you're actually filming real places, even if it's not the place you're saying it is on screen. If it looks like it could be and it's not fake, practical effects and scenery do so much to make a movie feel more real.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that's one of the things that, these type of movies did well back in this time period, because, it was still way too expensive to just try and do things, on a green screen and CGI. And it makes these movies, like you said, it just feels more real. Even, as dumb as the underwater shark is, right? Because it doesn't look great, she's still in an underwater tank. It's not just some CGI composite thing. And so, even though the shark is CGI, but you know what I mean. That wasn't
a real shark?
There's strangely not. So, but no, I agree with you. I think that all the locations they go to, and I am like you, I do kind of wish that instead of choosing Hong Kong as a place to go to, where we're trying to retrieve the orb from, somewhere else that felt more in line with the kind of action adventure-ness of Tomb Raider would have been more interesting. So I would have liked that. But you mentioned, the big flying squirrel sequence course, we have the opening sequence as well. We've got the shootout at the cave with the Terracotta Warriors, and tons of action scenes. We got motorcycle riding. Some of that looks fake, and some of it doesn't. But regardless, I am wondering what you thought of the action in this movie.
The action was great. I think, you can really tell that they put a lot of effort into adding some cool stunts that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like the flying squirrel suits. You expect people, if they're going to jump off of something, that they have a parachute, but not necessarily that they're going to spread their wings. So that was funny. And, adding in things like the jet ski stunt or the, biking competition that they're having between each other in the mountains just gives it a little bit more of something to do rather than just suddenly you're here, suddenly you're there kind of thing. It's enjoying the journey sort of addition to the movie. And I mean, I wish they had actually spent more time in the mountains or in Africa, because those areas are places that, a lot of people have never been, and you could easily make that feel so interesting the more you add. So, yeah, I mean, what did you think?
I thought it was really good for the most part. I think that they did a great job on the action. I had a lot of fun watching most of the sequences. Even, again, didn't love, being in downtown Hong Kong kind of thing. But I did really enjoy, like you said, the squirrel jump. It was cool. And I thought they did a great job with that, because it's a real thing. A lot of the action is very realistic, and the fight sequences, where they're trying to get the orb in Hong Kong looked good. I enjoyed all the action, especially, like I said, at the opening of the film. It was great. And so, yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think the action is good in this movie. I think they do a great job with it. And part of that is so much of the movie is done practically, and that does make a difference, and so it doesn't have to be ridiculously outlandish when things are being done practically in camera. And that, again, it just really does make a big difference. And so I did want to ask you about the production of the movie, because this is directed by Jean Debrant, I think is how you'd say his name. He directed Speed, Twister, Minority Report, and he's also worked as a cinematographer. A lot of his work is in cinematography. And so I wanted to kind of ask you first just about that part of the production, because he's not the cinematographer on this movie, but I found it very strange that so much of the movie, it doesn't look bad, but I feel like so many of the scenes are kind of overlit. And like, especially when they were in the caves with the Terracotta Warrior, and even just standing where there's that cave opening and everything, where it's like, it doesn't feel naturally lit. It just feels like there's way too much. There's places like that where I didn't love the lighting choices that they made. And it made it feel less cinematic for the movie by not choosing a little bit more dramatic lighting. And so, yeah, I don't know. Did that hit you at all, or is that just something that I noticed?
So I am glad you brought that up, because, there are things sometimes that I don't necessarily pick up on that then if you bring it up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good point. I did maybe subconsciously pick up on that and didn't think about it openly. But for me, it wasn't the fight at the caves with the terracotta soldiers, but rather the scene in the Cradle of Life itself. Although it's supposed to look very surreal and like it's an anti-gravity space, and you can never tell what tunnel someone is coming into or out of, the lighting there did really throw me off. And maybe it was intentionally supposed to do that, but it felt like it just wasn't quite the right fit for that scene. And that maybe it should have been more natural looking than like almost like blue and white.
Right. Yeah.
It was very
it's
futuristic feeling almost.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point.
Did you think
it's
that?
a great point.
In that scene, I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can absolutely see what you're saying. And I think I agree with you on that. And so I thought it was interesting too. And I don't know, maybe this does have something to do with it. But the director did not actually enjoy working on this movie because of all the studio interference that he was getting and the game makers interference that he was getting. And it's one of those things where there's not a ton of background information that I could find here. I did some digging to see if I could find any other places where it might be, but there wasn't a lot. And it made me wonder exactly what type of interference he was getting, and if the movie would have been better if he had just been able to do his vision of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and of course, I'm going to correct myself because he didn't direct Minority Report. That was Steven Spielberg. Forgive me. He was a producer on Minority Report. So he was a part of that, but, he didn't actually direct it. So, but all to say, I'm just, it's fascinating to me, him not really enjoying working on this film. And, I wonder if that has to do with, maybe not working as much with the cinematographer to create a more cinematic feel for the film, because maybe he's just trying to get done with it because he's so frustrated.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It could be just that there were too many cooks in the kitchen, as they say. And that, we started out in the first movie with a completely different director. And from the get-go, you're trying to deal with game makers and filmmakers trying to come together and agree on a story that makes sense for the character. And that's always hard. And, this, we were saying before, had been done better than the other ones that came before it that were video game adaptations. But maybe at this point it was still just too much of a bear, and not really having one person driving everything to make sure it was consistent. And that maybe that's why this director had such a bad experience, and that ultimately we don't get another movie with Angelina Jolie.
Yeah. I don't know.
That's what it seems like.
It could possibly be the case. And it's interesting too, because in general, I think for the most part, this movie, it feels slightly more polished than the first movie. Even though they actually spent less on this movie. And so that's really interesting to me as well. So it feels like the movie is slightly contradictory in some ways to me in that. So I wanted to ask you too, because, we talked about the music in the first movie, and this movie has a completely different composer with Alan Silvestri. He has a long history with movies and things that he's worked on, big franchises. And, of course, this is interesting because he also gets to use the theme from the video games for the film. And so how did you feel like this one worked?
I thought this one was really interesting. I particularly loved the sound effects that they used for, like, the orb sounds, the background music that they used during the fight scene in the lab in the city. There were some choices like that were very specific and very unique that really added something. And then overall, I think it definitely helps having the actual video game theme represented in the music. And just felt like it was better to listen to, and felt more consistent with what you would want from a blockbuster movie score. You don't want something that's just suitable. You would like to have something that's beautiful but also fits well. And I think that that's what we get a lot more here than we did in the first film.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think he did a great job with this score, and especially since the beauty of it is that it feels like that's more the type of score that you would have wanted in the first movie. And, by using the thematic elements from the video game, which is already established. But then, I think he does a good job, too, of kind of giving, like, he walks the line with some of those more electronic fight sequence parts of the film with the more symphonic. So I think he does a really good job. And, it does make me wish, though, I don't dislike the theme for Tomb Raider that was created for the video game, but I almost want more to it. I just wish it was more vibrant. And, just kind of, I don't know, I kind of would have loved to have had more of a march, as akin to Indiana Jones, is something in that vein. But I think Sylvester does a great job here with what he's got to work with. So, and, makes the most of it. Before we kind of talk about our ratings, I'm really interested for you with the idea of there not being a third one. The idea that Angelina Jolie says that she has no desire really to do a third film. She felt like she said she was able to do what she wanted to do, and that she didn't really want to come back. And that means the franchise doesn't get touched again until 2018 with the reboot. And because I was watching this movie today, and I was thinking, I almost wish that she would come back and do one more, do an older Lara Croft movie. I just think that would just be really interesting because she does this character so well. I really enjoyed her performance as this character, and I don't know. Would you want it? Would that be something you would want to see?
I would love that because I think that there are some similarities between Angelina the person and Lara the character, and that there is this fire and sly sarcasm that she brings to that role that's so much fun. Even during the serious moments, it's like she's kind of always got a glimmer in her eye. And I think it's unfortunate we didn't at least get a trilogy out of these. And like I said, the first one was such a big deal to me to see in the theater and had the poster and everything. She, I think, played a similar character kind of in the way she portrayed Mr. and Mrs. Smith. She has that action hero / spy vibe about her. So yeah, I would love to get another Lara Croft Tomb Raider movie with her, even at this point.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I mean, I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I think it would be great.
Well, write her a letter.
So, yeah. Well, I'm really interested to see then with all that we've talked about with this one, and I feel like there's been some good that we've really liked, and maybe a few things that we haven't loved. But where are you going to end up with your ratings for Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life?
So I end up kind of in the middle. I give it a little bit of credit for some cool stunts and for bringing in Gerard Butler, and really making me love Angelina so much more. But it ultimately just was missing some meat to it to really tie everything together. And so I end up giving it a 3 out of 5 orbs because it is fun. I have seen it several times because it's fun, but it's not a great Indiana Jones-ish movie because it kind of confuses itself between what it really is.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, it's still got some fun stuff going on with it and good casting.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Honestly, it is not as good for me as the first movie. And I think I gave the first movie 3.5. I think I would give this one 3.25. Like it's if there's just a couple of things that are a little bit different, I think I would like this movie more. But I think, like you said, it's not quite there, and it just doesn't quite have what that first movie did. There was something about that first movie that was a little bit different, and I think worked a little bit better. But so much fun to get a chance to talk about both of these films. You know, if people wanted to catch up with you, see what else you have going on these days, you know, where would they find you?
Well, of course, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd at Bespin Bell. Maybe I'll actually go on there and use it again. And on Facebook in the Babel Conference. And if you want to look at something else, I had a finished podcast with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells over on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network. And what about you?
Well, you could find me all over the place on social media under the name MattRushing02. Of course, here on the network outside of the 602 Club, you'll find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, Artificial Tango, and Saddle Up. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network doing a couple of shows. One is Owl Post about Harry Potter, each and every chapter. You can also find me on Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?